Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1096, and today's date is October 9th, 2016, and the title of the episode is The Current Economic Collapse News Brief. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, last week we saw gold come down quite a bit, and we mentioned it in a previous report, how there was a lot of gold sold off. And the total volume of this crash it's very suspicious because there was in excess of 1,000 tons of paper contracts that were dumped on the market in a matter of hours. That's 1/3 of the entire world's annual gold production from mining activities. So, does this sound like normal trading behavior? No, it doesn't. What makes this drop even more interesting is that it happened on Tuesday, right after the bank holiday in Germany, because the financial markets were closed on Monday in Germany. And this is when we heard a lot of this information coming out of Deutsche Bank. And we can see that Deutsche Bank is in a lot of trouble. They're still in trouble. Right now, Deutsche Bank issued its first US dollar denominated bond in 5 months, which raised about $3 billion in paper. But Deutsche Bank doesn't have many options. And I know the news is out there and the corporate media is out there telling you that, oh, the derivative book that Deutsche Bank has, it's not that big of a deal. It's not as big as everyone is saying. And if something does happen, it's not going to cause a chain reaction. This is actually coming out of the corporate media. And every time you start to hear stuff like that, you know it's the opposite of what's happening. Just like they told you, like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. AIG is fine. They only need one bailout. That's all they're going to need. The rest of the banks and everything else, all the financial institutions, everything else is fine. We have it all contained. Well, we see with Deutsche Bank right now, there's a lot of noise about them selling their assets. And if they did sell their assets, they might raise like 10 billion euro? And it's not even enough. They need a lot more than that. So what are the other two options? Well, they have an option of a bailout, and they have an option of a bail-in. Because as we know, Europe, United States, Canada, UK, many other countries, they have created the bail-in documents. And we can see right now that Germany has already said that they're not going to do a bailout. And if they do a bailout, other banks are going to come forward and say, you know something, you bailed out Deutsche Bank. We need to bail out all these Italy banks. We need to bail out the Spanish banks. And this will continue on. Now, what about the bail-ins? Well, this might be catastrophic. Even though they have the documents and everything's ready to go, this might be a huge problem, because if the rest of the world and the rest of investors and people who have their monies with these banks, they see them going into the bank, taking the funds there, people are going to run for the hills. So Deutsche Bank is in a situation where they need to come up with some type of answer, because otherwise it looks like this entire system is going to become crumbling down. And we know if Deutsche Bank goes, it is connected to many, many other banks, and there will be a chain reaction. Now, we know the Department of Justice placed a fine on Deutsche Bank, and this looks like this is a signal to Germany to listen, you need to go along with what we're doing, or else. And we see that John Cryan, the CEO of Deutsche Bank, visited the United States to try to come up with some type of deal, and he couldn't reach an agreement with the United States Department of Justice. So right now everything stands, and it looks like we're heading down this path where everything might start to implode. And it looks like with this suppression of the precious metals, we might be heading down this path, and it might be coming much sooner than everyone thinks. We see out in Iceland. On Thursday, Iceland's Supreme Court found 9 bankers guilty of market manipulation. And we know that Iceland has taken their bankers since the 2008 crisis and thrown them into jail, something the United States will not do. Because as we know, the central bank, the banks, the government, all of it's intertwined. They all work together. It's all part of the same exact machine. And this is what makes up a fascist country. We see Duterte. He is out there and he is telling the United States, listen, I know what you're going to try. I know you're going to try to oust me one way or another. And he's telling the United States that, listen, bring on the CIA. Try to get rid of me. And we know this is exactly what the United States would love to do. We know they would want to go in there and remove Duterte. And we can see this happening because they want the Philippines. It's a strategic location. It's part of the encircling of China. So we might see this happen sooner than later. We see out in Yemen, there was a huge bombing during a funeral, about 140 killed, 500 or so injured. And this came from the Saudi-led coalition who targeted a building hosting a Houthi funeral ceremony. And we've said this many, many times before. The United States government central bankers, Saudi Arabia, the paid mercenaries that are bombing Yemen, they're going after the people to say, listen, if you do not accept our puppet government, and you do not let our government back into the country and rule you, we will make your life very difficult. Well, the United Nations was out there and they're condemning what has happened, and it was a complete disaster. And we can see the United States government central bankers with Saudi Arabia, that is their proxy army, where they're bombing Yemen. Remember, Yemen never attacked Saudi Arabia whatsoever. Saudi Arabia, they thought this was going to be over in a couple of months. This has been going on for a very long time. And Saudi Arabia right now is using mostly paid mercenaries to fight in Yemen. We see Russia is looking at the situation with NATO and the United States, and they're realizing that the United States is pushing for war. I mean, we've been following this, we've been tracking this, we've been watching the military asset movements, we've been watching the military troop movements. And we can see with the missile shield in Europe, that is not there for Iran. That is actually there for China and Russia. And Russia is going to deploy their Iskander missile in Kaliningrad to neutralize the anti-ballistic missile system in Europe. And remember, everything that Russia is putting together here is within their country. Everything the United States and NATO is doing is outside of the United States and moving into other countries right up to the border of Russia. Can you imagine if Russia was placing missiles in Canada and Mexico? How would the United States government central bankers feel at this point? They would feel like, why is Russia doing this? Why are they putting missile systems on our borders? Well, this is what Russia is looking at, and they're saying this makes no sense whatsoever. But Russia knows that the United States government central bankers, they are pushing for war. They can see it. They understand what's happening. They understand the United States does not want peace. They do not want ceasefire. They want nothing like this whatsoever. We see the United States government central bankers, they are using propaganda right now to convince the world that Russia and Syria are barbaric, that they're destroying Aleppo, that they're bombing civilians. This is furthest from the truth. What is happening in Aleppo is Russia and Syria, they are surrounding Aleppo. They've captured many areas within the district, and they are forcing the terrorists, the moderate rebels, the terrorists, out of Aleppo. Now, this is the paid mercenary army of the United States. And the United States right now, the United States government, they are trying to stop this any way they possibly can. So they put forth a resolution in the UN. Now, the French drafted the resolution saying, we need to stop the bombing in Aleppo. It is barbaric. We need to have some type of ceasefire. Well, Russia vetoed this. They vetoed the entire draft and said, listen, separate the moderate rebels from the terrorists. We won't have a problem there anymore. So Russia said, okay, we will draft a resolution that states the United States government, central bankers, the coalition forces must separate the moderate rebels from the terrorists. Well, that didn't pass either. So right now we have a situation where nothing was settled on, and Russia and Syria are about to take the entire area of Aleppo, which makes us worry right now, because we understand that if Aleppo is completely taken over by the Syrian government and Russia and is removed from the terrorists, United States government central bankers, the United States government is really at a disadvantage, where there is no reason for them to even be in Syria. They can't make the case that they're going after the Islamic State, because Sergei Lavrov already called out the United States, saying, the United States is making a lot of flights over Syria, but we've been watching them over Aleppo, and they are not bombing the terrorists whatsoever. They're not bombing al-Nusra. They're not bombing al-Qaeda. They're not bombing the Islamic State. They're just flying over. That is it. Why? Because they're trying to protect them, but if they start bombing the Syrian army or the Russian forces, there's a huge problem. So the United States government central bankers, they need to do something where they can create a false flag, where they have to make it look like Russia, Syria, they're the ones who caused this problem. And on Friday, I mentioned how U.S. planes, F-18s, they were painted to look like Russian planes. This might be part of a false flag, but there also might be something else that might occur, because if they can show some type of evidence that Syria or Russia were attacking and hitting these targets, they can make the case where they can go after Syria and Russia. If they can show Russia or Syria bombing maybe U.S. troops, the United States government central bankers would play this up with propaganda to convince the world that Russia or Syria has just attacked. I mean, this is just one scenario. I'm sure they're going to come up with some other type of scenario, but this is what we're watching right now, because we can see right now that the situation in Syria, it is not going well for the United States government central bankers. And this is all part of their plan to keep the petrodollar propped up. Because once they lose Syria, this game is over. The entire economy, this is all wrapped around this entire economic collapse that we're seeing right now. Everything is interconnected with this. The amount of debt that is around the world, what the United States is doing in the Middle East, the oil hooked to the petrodollar, the central banking system, it is all connected, and it is all falling apart at the same time. So the United States right now decided to come out with a statement, and this came from the Department of Homeland Security, the National Intelligence Agencies, saying that yes, Russia was behind the cyber attacks, and they were intending to interfere with the U.S. election process. Now, of course, the United States government central bankers, as usual, has no evidence to prove what they just said. None exists. They're just out there using propaganda. And we have to remember, going back to 2011 NDAA, Section 501C, the United States is allowed to use propaganda on the American people. And all they have to do is put a headline out there, and people will believe. They never have to follow it up with any type of proof or anything like that. But it's very simple. Instead of using electronic voting systems, use paper ballots. Have each district collect the paper ballots, have it counted in front of each town in that little area, have the number posted in the town, have that number filtered up to the next level and all the way up to the top. You never even have to worry about a cyber attack. But they don't want to do that, because then they can't manipulate the elections. And we can see right now that the United States government central bankers, they're looking to place sanctions on Russia for attacking the election system. Now, of course, this is to provoke Russia once again. Now, we can see from the past that Russia is not easily provoked. They don't come out and say, okay, now we're going to attack you. Actually, they do the opposite of what the United States expects. They always say, okay, you know something, let's have talks. Let's talk about peace. Let's talk about a ceasefire. Let's calm the situation down. But the United States government central bankers, they don't want this. They want Russia to do something. Now, from this announcement that Russia was behind these cyber attacks, it looks like the powers that be, the elite, the central bankers, they're very worried about the elections. And we can see right now, just from this announcement, it could be that they're preparing to postpone these elections somehow, some way. Now, they won't need any proof to show that as the elections are going on, that Russia came in and cyber attacked the elections. They don't need proof of this. They can just halt it if it's not going their way and saying we need to stop this because we're seeing anomalies in the numbers and we're getting word that these elections were hacked. That's all they have to do. And they never have to provide any type of proof. And they can say we need to postpone this until we figure it out. Now, the only reason they would do this is it's because they're not getting the candidate they want into the office, into the White House. And we can see right now that they're approaching this type of scenario by announcing this at this point. Why did they wait until October 8th, 9th to announce this? Because this is in preparation for what is about to happen. Now remember, they're going to be watching their polls to see what the people are really thinking. Not the corporate media polls, their polls, their readings to show what exactly is going on. And they're going to use this to determine, should we go forth with this? Should we postpone the elections? And we can see we are headed in this direction. And we can see right now, elections are about a month out or so. And we can see they're already making preparations to postpone them. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.